Artificial intelligence in all its incarnations may be the single biggest event in the history of our species. This is so big, Jeff, that it's hard to get one's head around how big it is. What we're seeing is an increasing erosion of what makes human beings unique. We're going to see systems that are better at everything than human beings are. Everything.
Meet Michael Watkins,
expert on leadership, transitions, and organizational success,
and best-selling author.
Do you still maintain a growth mindset? Are you committed truly to ongoing learning and adaptation? Are you proactive in seeking out opportunity? Negating those qualities, what that sets you up for, given what's coming at us, it's not pretty. And they use this metaphor of the dinosaur admiring the approaching asteroid for its beauty. At some point, the asteroid strikes the Earth.
Welcome to another episode of Unlock Your Potential. This is Jeff Lerner, your host. Always so excited to be back having amazing conversations with amazing human beings. Today, we are joined by yet another. It's just amazing how many amazing human beings there are out there waiting to be spoken to on this show. Today, it's Michael Watkins, professor of leadership and organizational change. He is a globally recognized leadership transitions expert and author of a book that I actually, even before I connected his name to the book, I know this book pretty well. It's called The First 90 Days, Proven Strategies for Getting Up to Speed Faster and Smarter. It's basically kind of one of maybe the go-to handbook in business and executive management leadership circles for like, I'm starting a new thing and I need to come in strong because there's probably a board watching and I want to make a showing in my first 90 days. This is the book. No, it's a really kind of a landmark deal. But in 2023, Watkins was Watkins. It sounds weird to now that I'm talking to you to actually just kind of Watkins, like I'm Sherlock Holmes. Watson was inducted into the Thinkers 50 Management Hall of Fame and has developed tools to help professionals navigate personal and organizational change challenges. He's been doing this for decades. The First 90 Days has sold more than 1.5 million copies, 23 different languages. He's written 15 books on leadership. This is actually pretty cool. He joined IMD in 2007, which is, I'm going to probably fumble the acronym, but it's Institute for Management Development, I think, roughly.
Yep,
which is a big, maybe not as known here in the US outside of executive leadership circles, but it's one of the most influential management development organizations in the world. I think they have a campus I want to say they're based in Switzerland. I know they have a campus in China, I want to say. And I noticed they are the most cited organization in the Harvard and MIT business literature of any organization in the world. Before that, he was a professor at INSEAD. Is that how you say that? INSEAD? INSEAD. I've seen the name a zillion times. It's like, again, Americans may not know, but it's one of the foremost international business universities in the world. Are they based? Where are they based? Switzerland? Spain?
They're based in Fontainebleau, which is just south of Paris. I wasn't there for very long, right? I mean, I was at Harvard for 13 years. I spent a couple of years teaching part-time at INSEAD, and then I moved to IMD.
Oh, so you had to slum it at Harvard to get to INSEAD, it sounds like. Exactly. No, this is great. It's great to have names like Harvard on your bio. You don't even have to do anything. You just show up and be like, see, it says Harvard here.
I count on it every day, Jeff. it carries me through, you know. When anything starts to go wrong, I just say Harvard. Everything stops, and the reset happens that we need, right?
That's amazing. And then the final thing I'll say, and we can get into the meat here. He's got a new book out. Came out early 2024. The 6 Disciplines to Strategic Thinking, which I'm excited to actually dig into those 6 disciplines. Michael, lots more I'm sure I could say, but the audience probably wants to hear from you. Welcome to the show.
Hey, delighted to be with you, Jeff, and really looking forward to the conversation.
So likewise, and gosh, we have about 50 minutes-ish from here, so I'm going to try to cover a lot of ground. I would like to start, I always am extremely interested in the man or the human behind and before all the accolades and the bio talking points. So maybe give us a little bit of a starting point, how you grew up, where you're from. And in particular, I'm always looking for those like inflection moments or inflection experiences where the seeds of your present greatness started to get planted and became more predictable.
Yeah, or the random walk through my career is another way to look at it, right?
Sure.
I always like tell people I'd love to tell you I planned it all out in exquisite detail, and today sit at the pinnacle of the mountain that I imagined I would climb, right? But that's not quite true. So look, I started studying transitions circa 2000 to early 2000s, right? And I wrote the first 90 days in 2003. And for many years, I told a story about how I got interested in transitions that was basically a story about teaching a class at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and having this realization as I was teaching about organizational change that I knew virtually nothing about how people took new roles and got up learning curves and made change happen, and simultaneously realized there was almost nothing out there about that subject. And that kind of sort of took me down the intellectual road to what I do today, right? And so, but it wasn't really until probably a relatively few number of years ago that I finally figured out why I was so interested in and had a very natural affinity for making transitions, right? Right? When I tell you what the story is, you'll go, Michael, seriously, it took you that long to figure it out. We're beginning to wonder if you even belonged at Harvard, right? But anyway, the basic story was that I grew up, I'm a Canadian originally. I grew up in a relatively small community in Northern Ontario, fairly remote community, and was the first person in my family to go to college or university, right? So, but I think I always felt like I belonged someplace else. And the first 3 years of my life I spent in that community, and and then my father, who worked for the power utility for the province, decided to embark on an adventure that took us across the northern Canada to construction projects for power dams and transmission lines. And we moved every single year, right? And so every single year I left behind the people I was with. I moved to a new school. I had to figure out, how to fit in the context of the new school. And this actually, and we did that for 7 years, right? And so when I moved back to the community I came from, I'd already been through 5 or 6 schools, right? And then for a variety of reasons that aren't important, I also did the last 3 years of elementary school in different schools again, right? So the net of it was I was in a different school and a different class with a different group of people for every year from kindergarten through the end of elementary school, right? And, of course, I had to learn how to transition, right? I had to.
And that let me ask, that was from age 5 to what, 12-ish, maybe?
3 to 13 in the end.
3 to 13, okay.
Yep.
So let me just say, those are pretty critical years. If you look up like stages of psychosocial development theory, there's like a 3 to 6 phase, a 6 to 10 phase, and then now you're talking early adolescence. I mean, those are like major conflict resolution, identity creation phases of human development. So you were just like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So now you know exactly why I'm such a mess, right?
Totally. Right.
It's now crystal clear, right? What's going on, right? But I think the thing was that I also was fortunate, to be an intelligent kid. And so one of the things I was able to do was always excel throughout all that process. But you can also imagine that creates its own problems, right? When you join a new class and suddenly you're the smartest kid in the class and the teacher loves you and blah, 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 right? And so I sort of had to learn different strategies, right, for not becoming the kid that everyone wanted to beat up, because you're the new kid and you're the smart kid in the room, And so I learned to build alliances. I learned how to fit into that construct. I learned not to kind of toot my horn very much. I started helping other kids very early with their work, and so teaching became something I did very, very early, basically, and I've always done through my entire life is helped other people learn and get better, right? And so, when you look at me today, first of all, a big focus was transitions. A second big focus was building alliances and negotiating, right? And a third was the vocation of being an educator. And I'm sure personality and family had something to do with that. But, that's how I've kind of come to understand why I am the way I am, and is that set of early experiences that sort of propelled me in these directions, right? And also had downsides, right? I for a long time was a very restless human being, for obvious reasons, right? I got used to moving around. It became kind of what I did. I had to learn to settle, right? Which was a different problem altogether.
I have to ask, because this came to mind. Actually, there's two things that have come to mind as you've been sharing, referential to other episodes of the show. One, I'll just sort of generally mention, because it's kind of becoming my new mantra, is I had a guy who's an AI researcher named Ken Stanley, who developed all the AI algorithms. I don't want to say all of them. He was a core AI developer for Uber and their mapping algorithms and whatever. And he's doing some cool startup stuff now. But anyways, his kind of whole thesis and body of work in AI is around non-object orientation AI development. So it's like, instead of creating AI to do a thing, let's create AI to embody a set of capabilities and then let it do what it wants to do without a goal and see what happens. And so he's kind of derived this
that's cool.
theme of like greatness cannot be planned, that all the greatest things are emergent. They ensue versus being pursued, to sort of paraphrase Viktor Frankl.
I love it. That's super interesting.
So that's sort of just feels thematically relevant here. The other is, I'm curious, have you ever heard of or come across a gentleman named Bruce Feiler?
No, I don't.
Okay, so Bruce is a guy, I had him on the show probably 100 episodes ago. And he has his best known book is called Life is in the Transitions.
Oh, I know that book. Oh, of course I know who you're talking about. Yeah, no,
okay.
For sure.
Okay, for sure. He talks about living a non-linear life.
Yep.
And what his theme is called life quakes. It's like just earthquakes that happen in your life and you have to pivot. And that really, the ability to effectively, it's kind of like Buffett says the first rule of investing is don't lose money, and the second rule is refer back to the first rule, right? Just don't lose money. It's kind of the same thing, I think, in the compounding curve of a life, is like you have to be able to tolerate these disruptions without having them be these catastrophic setbacks. Exactly. So transition navigation seems like a critical, under talked about life skill. I think you'd agree.
So that's a great book, and it's a book I like a lot. I didn't associate immediately the name with it, right? And I mean, his research, I think, if I recall correctly, he said basically the average American adult has gone through sort of 35 plus major transitions in their lives, right? Of which 5 or 6 are what he called life quakes, which are basically things like you get divorced or, lots of the big ones, right? The ones that really shake you up a lot. And I think that, I certainly draw on some of his thinking when I help people think about transition, but also I'm increasingly interested in resilience, right? And how we stay resilient through those transitions, because those things can break you, and I, without getting into detail, I've had some pretty substantial life quakes happen that I think largely been able to, see myself through in good shape, in part because I learned how to make transitions, in the way I did. So it's lovely work. Yeah. And I totally see the connection.
Okay. Well, beautiful. Yeah. So if the audience is, I'd say, inspired or intrigued by this conversation, and you're like, I wish I could listen to more about transitions and nonlinear thinking, those are 2 more episodes. So you don't have to go, seek out Joe Rogan for your podcast gratification. You stay here. But anyway, okay, I'm drawn now to, I really want to get into these 6 disciplines. Let's start there. In fact, let's start there. And then I just want to plant this seed so we don't run out of time and not come back to it. That I have a leadership methodology that my wife and I have developed, and we teach and operationalize. It's called love-based leadership. And I think it could be a kind of a cool counterpoint to like, combine it with some of your thoughts and just kind of have a dialogue.
Super interesting. I'd love to do that.
But before we go there, let's dig in. New-ish book, 6 disciplines to strategic thinking. Tell me about it, and then maybe like if you could even break it down for the Cliffs Notes.
Yep. So the world is increasingly a crazy place, and is likely, I believe, to become a crazier place, right? There's research on this, but we're facing what probably is unprecedented levels of, economic, social, climatic, environmental turbulence, right? And organizations and leaders need to figure out how to continue to not merely survive, but ideally, thrive through that reality, right? And I'm not a total pessimist on the future of humanity, Jeff, right? But I do look at what's going on and think, wow, these are challenging times. And the leaders I work with, and my personal practice is working with senior leaders, usually CEOs these days, taking new roles. And so I get to sort of see the world to a degree through their eyes of what they're dealing with. And they're dealing with this extraordinary amount of turbulence, right? I mean, you're interested in AI. I'm interested in AI. AI is like a tsunami, right, of change coming. And it's already upon us to a degree, but I think we're in the early stages of what, the impact's going to be. So technology, environment, social political shifts, right? So the average leader today is being pressurized and challenged at senior levels in a way I don't think they've been before. Yeah. At least, I would say in my lifetime, probably, right? So that was part of the impetus for, getting interested in the subject. But I was also approached by Penguin Random House to write about it. And I initially was quite reluctant to do it because I kind of had my niche in transitions. And actually it was my wife that beat me over the head and said, are you serious? Penguin Random House is offering you a commission to write a book, don't be an idiot. Write the book, Michael, right? So it was kind of a combination of those things, but I had been working on strategic thinking before that. So I think I just say that, Jeff, to say that, I view strategic thinking as one of the 3 or 4 things that leaders today absolutely need to focus on if they're going to, continue to lead their organizations in the future, right? Strategic thinking, because without it, you don't know what to do or why to do it. So you're gonna fail inevitably. I think organizational agility is something I'm quite interested in these days because, you need an organization that's capable of moving with you through the shifts you need to take. And then resilient leadership, which I know you're interested in as well, right? How do we help leaders be more resilient through these times? So that's kind of the triangle of stuff I'm working on these days. But let's focus in on strategic thinking, right? So I view it as a core pillar of future success, right? If you're not able at senior leadership levels to be a strong strategic thinker, I think you're in deep trouble, right? And your organization is in deep trouble. Yeah. So that got me going down the road of, okay, yeah, go ahead, Jeff, please.
Actually, can we pause really quick? I would love to hear when you say leaders, as leaders, messaging to leaders, how can we define leaders here for the audience in particular in a way that, let's assume most of the audience isn't the CEO of a large organization. Yeah. Help expand that for everyone. Cause I personally believe it's a character trait, not a position you're, titled to.
No. So look, I think leadership is necessary at every level of an organization, including at the level of individual contributors who are, trying to move initiatives forward or trying to do great work, right? So leadership to me is a quality that exists at every level of the organization. And I think to connect to your point, I don't think strategic thinking can or should be the province of only the most senior leaders in an organization, right? There's too much going on to have a single brain or a couple of brains trying to process everything that's happening, right? You need to push that strategic thinking capability down much deeper into the organization. And I would argue that at every level, there are aspects of strategic thinking that are valuable, right? Even just the ability to think critically about problems, I think is a part of it. Yeah. So great that you interjected like that. So don't think that it's only the CEOs that need to do this, right?
So don't try to run your company, or don't try to run companies the way North Korea tries to run its economy, with like a few thinkers pulling strings and the whole thing being a mess.
Well, no, exactly. And I think that connects to that theme of adaptive organization, which, highly centralized organizations don't tend to be terribly adaptive, right? And so you've got to strike the right balance between leveraging the power of the core, but also decentralizing things so that they're closer to the customer, closer to the reality, sure, for sure. So anyway, but so I think that's, where this all began. And then, of course, I start to dig in and I do what I usually do, which is I go in and do a whole series of interviews with people, senior learning and development people, senior HR people who develop top executives themselves. And the first question I ask is, what is strategic thinking? Mm. And I almost always got this kind of thoughtful, sort of brow furrowed kind of look. And then the answer was basically, I know it when I see it, right? And that's not a terribly helpful answer, right? Because maybe you and lots of the people who are your listeners may have had the experience of being told at some point you need to strengthen your strategic thinking capability, right? And if you don't have any idea what it is or how to assess it, that's not very helpful advice, right? And it cannot even be code sometimes for, the lack of that perceived quality is going to be a reason we're not going to promote you, for example, right? So we gotta kind of untangle that a little bit. So, to me, one contribution was to try and get a whole lot more precise about what is strategic thinking capability, and to focus on the thinking and not the strategy, right? So in this book, there was, I think, one mention of a strategy framework, and that's Michael Porter's, famous 5 forces model. Because I wasn't focusing on strategy or strategic frameworks or strategic planning. I was interested in the thinking, right? The thinking part of it. And what's the thinking that people need to do in order to be able to, engage strategically, and of course, how do you build that? And it leads to questions like, are, great strategic thinkers born or made, which we can talk about if that's of interest to you. So ultimately, I kind of converged on a definition of strategic thinking that is anchored in a set of mental capabilities that allow leaders, right, or, more broadly, right, to recognize emerging challenges and opportunities, establish the right priorities for their organizations, but critically then mobilize their organizations to engage, right, to do the right things. And that recognize, prioritize, mobilize model is what is at the core of the start of the book, right? Does that make sense to you, Jeff? Does it make, do you see that sort of that idea, first of all, of needing to be able to, define strategic thinking in order to be able to assess or develop it, and then how that idea, helps a little bit.
Not only do I see it as you're talking, I'm copying the Amazon link to your book, and I'm sharing it in our I just pasted it there so I wouldn't forget to do it for our senior leadership thread of my organization, because and it's almost, I won't even have to put any caption to the share. They'll just know, because this is a thing that we talk about all the time. And I notice It's especially germane for us because as a remote organization, we don't naturally huddle. Like we're very off on our own a lot. And so we really, really have to prioritize the distribution of strategic thinking because we just don't have like a natural huddle setting. I mean, Slack has a huddle setting that tries to give it to us, but it just doesn't happen the same way it does in a physical organization. And so, we talk a lot about strategic thinking, and it is incredibly nebulous as you're describing. So thank you for doing this work.
No. So, and I think that, I think a conversation I have these days with leadership teams is about how do you sense and respond to the important things that are going on inside of your organization and outside your organization? Like, exactly how do you do that? And usually there's this kind of, again, there's this sort of pause, like, well, we've got, we collect customer data, right? We collect engagement data on our employees. We do financial planning. There's lots of pieces to it. But it's not always the case that people are thinking about the totality of how their organization senses and responds. And that ability to recognize and prioritize and mobilize is really what that's all about, right? What you're doing is, as an organization, you are sensing and responding to what's going on. And cute little frameworks, right? So that recognize, prioritize, mobilize, of course, that's RPM. That's not an accident. But the point that I was trying to make with that is your speed around that cycle matters a lot. Right, your ability to go through the cycle of recognize, prioritize, mobilize matters, right? And here, I mentioned I started my academic career at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and I spent a number of years teaching senior national security executives, right? So national security programs, so uniform military, civilian defense department, intelligence agency, State Department, right? So it was fascinating, and wrote pretty extensively about international diplomacy at one point in my career. But I came across a model that was part of what was then known as the revolution in military affairs, that was basically by a guy named John Boyd, if that name means anything to you, about speed as a critical element of war. And the ability to go through your decision loop faster than your opponent, or the way he described it was get inside their decision making, so that they're responding to the last thing you do, and you've already done the next one, right? It's kind of the analogy, right? And you saw that kind of realized in for example, the first Gulf War as an example, right? So that notion of being able not merely to recognize, prioritize, mobilize, but also do it quickly. Right? More quickly than your competitors, quickly enough to track with what's going on in the internal and external environments of your organization. And I think that, just even having a conversation with your organization about that alone, how do we do that? Are we good at it? Right? Are we good at recognizing what's happening internally, externally? Are we good at establishing the right priorities? Once we have, are we effective at mobilizing our organization to do something about it? Yeah. That's, I'm sure it seems like a simple, almost duh conversation, but it's surprising how deep a conversation you can then have. And it sometimes reveals really big gaps in the system, right? That could easily lead to surprises. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually want to camp here for a sec. This, you've just totally hooked me in with this concept of decision, like, I'll just label it decision cycling, like decision cycle rate or something, because and there's a lot that I won't bother you with, right? It's like, this is super relevant for me. My business is going through a massive, frankly, pretty chaotic or at least disruptive transition. I think we're trying to maximize disruption and minimize chaos at the same time, which is fun. And so I'm thinking about this decision. How fast are we sort of iterating our decision cycle? And in terms of a competitor, you mentioned the 5 forces. I think the first one is essentially about the competition, right? Is the first force.
Absolutely.
And so it's like, but I'm enamored with this as I'm thinking about it. So if you could, let's just say hypothetically, make 1.1 decisions for every one decision your competitor makes, then it'll feel you'll dupe them into thinking that they're playing ping pong with decision reaction. But by 10 decisions down the road, you've now lapped them and you're one ahead.
Yep.
And they didn't even notice it.
So I love the way you just framed it, right? And I'm going to shamelessly steal, but I will attribute in the future that that's exactly the concept, right? And I think and I would go beyond that to the challenges that the world throws at you, right? Because the world often throws challenges that challenge entire industries, right? And again, your ability to move faster than your competitors, but also move fast enough to deal with an emerging crisis, right? I mean, we know from all the research on crisis management, things that look like like brilliance on day one, look like, a reasonable response on day two, look like, you're really kind of way behind the curve by day 3, right? And so that speed of response here too, I think, matters in dealing with just what the world is throwing at us these days. Yeah. 100%. But I like the 1.1 decisions to ratio a lot.
Yeah, that's super interesting to me, and I agree with you. If it's decision pacing between competition, then you have that sort of lapping ability. But if it's reactivity to the market, then it's always like there's like a sort of a first mover advantage to whoever can make the response decision the fastest, assuming the force hits everyone at the same time. So as I'm thinking about that, paired with AI now, and paired with my awareness of the audience of this show, right? So let me sort of triangulate all that. So the audience of the show, generally, apologies to anyone listening who doesn't fit this description. I love you too, and I'm glad you're here. But generally, I think it's people that are sort of like aspirational to life change, which is interesting in the sense that they're courting transition, which a lot of people, I think, naturally as humans, we resist transition. But the audience of this show is largely people that are like, okay, I'm ready to transition. I want to do it. I want to minimize risk and maximize speed and effectiveness. And that's because a lot of the audience comes from my platform, my life design platform Mantra. And so to all of you out there that are listening, I think there's a couple factors at play here. One of the things we always say, success loves speed, like this ability, but speed isn't reckless, just going about doing lots of stuff. It is speed of decision and execution in particular. So that seems really relevant here and consistent. But this AI thing as kind of the frame of all of this, like I think we probably at some level could just spend this whole hour talking about that, and it wouldn't be nearly sufficient or overweighted at all. I read, my dad actually forwarded me something, pretty great website for anybody that wants a paid subscription to yet another newsletter written by smart people. It's called FFTT, Forest for the Trees, FFTT.com. And they just put out some pretty interesting research on AI. And just for the audience and everybody to kind of get this perspective, by 2035, so in just over 10 years, it is projected that the general cost of labor provided by humanoid robots, which is essentially robots doing anything that people are currently doing that could conceivably be replaced by a robot doing, which is a huge number of those things. In 10 years, the cost will be $1 an hour. In 20 years, the cost will be 10 cents an hour. So if we as humans accept that in our lifetimes, probably in our working lifetimes, the general cost of labor is going to drop to somewhere between 10 cents and $1 an hour for most things that displace most of us. Because a lot of people, I think, are sort of accepted into the inverse of this centralized strategic thinking model of like, look, I'm just here to do my job. Okay, if you're not thinking strategically now, then when this hits, you're so far behind. And I'm not trying to be like fire and brimstone here. This is just like data. It's out there. It's happening. And frankly, as an entrepreneur, it's exciting. As a human, I recognize it's likely going to be tragic at some level. But like that's actually what we're here talking about. Like these are big themes. Exactly. And so let's maybe dig deeper into this strategic thinking framework, almost maybe with that as the lens of like anybody needs this way of thinking now to navigate what's coming, whether they're aware of it or not.
Yeah. So artificial intelligence in all its incarnations, of which robotics, obviously is one, maybe the single biggest event in the history of our species. The only thing that may compete from it is if there really is some kind of, major climate catastrophe that happens, right? But this is so big, Jeff, that it's hard to get one's head around how big it is, because, I developed a little bit of a framework. I used to do a lot of research on knowledge management, some of the early stuff and some of the early AI rule-based systems stuff I was engaged with way back when. And, what we're seeing is an increasing erosion of what makes human beings unique. And I think, and it's progressive, right? And I built this little framework, which we don't need to get into, a kind of 7 levels of AI capability, right? The highest of which is agency and consciousness, and we're not there yet. And the one below it is kind of the ability to engage in unstructured planning and goal formation and pursuit. We're not quite there yet, although we're all waiting to see what GPT-5 is going to look like, and it may get there. Mm-hmm. And below that is the ability to do really sophisticated emotional processing around things like empathy, right? This is the kind of stuff that would go into AI coaches and therapists and so on, right? But the main point here is that within from a species and history point of view, vanishingly short period of time, we're going to see systems that are better at everything than human beings are. Yeah, everything, right? And the cost equation, I think, is really daunting. I mean, you gave the example of robotics, but I can give you an example from studies that have been being done around radiology, right? Now, someone today, right, trains for a decade to be a really good radiologist. The systems today outperform the best radiologists in terms of their predictions, and they do it at 1% of the cost.
Yeah, that's a $400,000 a year, like at median job. Yeah.
And we're not. I mean, obviously, there's a certain amount of resistance from radiologists to kind of let this technology kind of just do the work. But the reality is, that profession largely is becoming obsolete and will become, once we get to the point where we can trust, we trust as patients that AI is going to do a better job than your radiologist. Our general practitioners will be getting input from AI systems about imaging, and we won't really need radiologists anymore. And we're going to see that happen to every, I think, single profession that involves cognitive reasoning work, right? And I think it's going to happen faster than most people imagine it's going to happen, right? I kind of feel like we're in that moment right now, kind of the indrawn breath,
Yeah.
And now what's going to happen, right? Because there's this enormous ferment going on of figuring out how to apply these tools to different applications and create specialized systems and combine classical AI, machine learning with generative AI to create these systems that do things. Legal profession's another example, right? So I'm quite interested in what I call sentinel professions, right? Which is professions where we're going to see the impact earliest, right? Law, certain areas of law, contract law, for example, certainly an example. Radiology is an example. But that's just going to be the leading edge, I think, of what's going to be happening, right? And I don't want to depress us, although it's easy, to kind of just get overwhelmed by the thought. But the advice I give to everybody is you need to embrace this technology with wholehearted enthusiasm, right? You need to figure out how you are going to continue to be relevant in the context of a world in which these systems are just so incredibly powerful, right?
Yeah, that by the way, like, I just want to bold what you just said. How to stay relevant in a world where, frankly, most of what humans are relevant for presently becomes irrelevant because machines do it better.
Yeah, and I think, again, I don't want to get us up on tangents, right? But I because of the doctoral work I did some studying in the history of technology, and of course, previous waves of what are known as general purpose technologies, and I think that this is one, they always created productivity improvement, but they also opened up new jobs, right? So I went back just for fun. You're going to think this is a weird form of fun, but there it is. And looked at things like the implementation of steam power in the UK, the implementation of electricity in the US, right? The adoption of the internet globally. Yeah. Adoption of steam in the UK took 150 years. Adoption meaning up to 80% of the eventual nation, right? Adoption of electricity in the US took 70 years. Adoption of the internet took 25 years to get to that full level of saturation. I think we're going to see it in a decade with AI.
Well,
and that's pretty astounding.
AI, the big change, the paradigm shift is, yes, AI will, and this could be a tangent if we get speculative, but fundamentally, as AI creates new jobs, it will theoretically be better at understanding and developing the functions and abilities to do those new jobs faster than the humans that are trying to react to it. So it's the only technology that is self-fulfilling in its job creation disruption, as opposed to everything else, which just shifted a different type of labor back to humans. So like, it's pretty crazy to think about. And so then to solve for that, like, what does relevance look like in 20 years? It's like, it would seem that it would be kind of going up your ladder of the 7 functions to like, we got to kind of be the holdouts for humans at the top, which is, I guess, to restate, I think what I heard you say, it's like unstructured planning, it's emotional intelligence, and at the highest level,
knowledge integration and creativity.
Yeah. And that's where, which is great to me. I mean, I dropped out of high school to become a jazz musician. So like, because
improvisation comes naturally, right?
Yeah. And I rejected the status quo to pursue creative self-expression, improvisationally in real time. So like, I love that for humans, but it's terrifying for most humans to live on that edge.
It is.
And yet life is getting pushed to that edge in a sense.
Hey there, it's Jeff. So real quick, I want to let you know about my text message community. I use text messages to provide unique value to the Unlock Your Potential community. These texts could just be random thoughts. It could be letting you be the first to know about an event I'm planning, maybe giving an update on a special I'm running or some free training that I host for my community. Anyway, just shoot me a text to get subscribed to the list. The number is 702-996-3926. Again, that is 702-996-3926. Let's get back to the podcast.
It really is, right? And I'm going to be fascinated to watch what happens as it really begins to, I believe, bite from an employment point of view. And I mean, we may be partially cushioned by the fact that falling birth rates have meant that there's fewer people to do jobs. That's probably going to help.
You're saying the world isn't getting overcrowded? I thought the Malthusians still preached that there's too many of us.
Well,
I'm being tongue in.
Yeah, I know you are. But, okay. Yeah. But for most developed countries, we're seeing shrinking workforces, right, and aging sets of populations, and that may help actually paradoxically with this whole implementation, right? But just to make this personal, I guess I think about it in terms of what advice would I give to my children about how to thrive in this environment, right? And it kind of upends traditional wisdom to a degree, because it used to be, find a profession, become a programmer, become an engineer, become a physician, become a whatever. Forget it. Do a, liberal arts degree. Get super broad in general. Become creative. Become integrative. That's what's going to last for the longest, I think, in terms of generating relevance for people. So it sort of upends the traditional view of how one.
Yeah, it's like the ability
from an educational point of view.
The ability to draw increasingly non-obvious conclusions will become the longest lasting currency, as everything that is less non-obvious is absorbed by programmatic, machines.
Yeah, we may yet see things that change this, right? We may yet see governments intervene in certain ways that help slow down, which I actually personally think would be a good thing, because humans are amazing at adapting if we have the time, right?
Yeah.
It's if we have the time.
But under pressure, we go animal.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, what worries me. And so I think if there are things we can do to kind of slow down this at least a little bit, it's worth thinking about. We're never going to stop it. So, forget.
So what about
that, for sure.
Let me ask you this. What about not your kids, but your let's say, imagine, I don't know how old your kids are, but imagine they were 40, kind of midstream, going, I don't think this is going where I was told it was going 20 years ago when I made these decisions. Yeah. I want to pivot. This is my audience. I want to pivot. Yeah, I want to transition. But to what?
Yep. So the short answer is I don't know, right? Because, the short answer is I don't know. But I can tell you that the qualities that you described for your audience are what's going to make the difference, right? It's do you still maintain a growth mindset? Are you committed truly to ongoing learning and adaptation? Are you proactive in seeking out opportunity, right? It's those sorts of qualities, which I think is what you're talking about in your audience, right?
Would
that are going to make a difference.
Would you agree with sort of encapsulating all that under the label of becoming more entrepreneurial?
Yes, that's not a bad way of thinking about it, right? Many of the qualities of entrepreneurs. And in fact, my kids are now in their early to mid 20s, and they're all entrepreneurial, and that's not an accident, right?
So this is you are thank you, especially with that Harvard credential. I feel very emboldened here. You have validated why my platform mantra is, well, our sort of internal mantra is that we're solving for human fulfillment at scale. We're trying to create our student to be just a higher level of human fulfillment across systematizable across the thousands or millions of students, hopefully. And so, but like, there's a reason we called it Entra. It's not because it's not because we're trying to turn everyone into a business owner per se, or even teach entrepreneurship per se. But I think it's a helpful connection to draw between, like, our methodology is called life design, which is this way of intentionally engineering your life to maximize the probability of total fulfillment across all the category or areas of life. But there's an entrepreneurial ethos to that way of being in the modern world, is the connection we're drawing. Honestly,
I 100% agree with you. No, I 100% agree with you. Right? I think that's what you just articulated is right on. And I think, when you say things like this, you also want to anticipate what's going to happen to the people that don't embrace that.
Yeah.
Right. If you think about the negating those qualities, what that sets you up for, given what's coming at us, it's not pretty. Right. And
well,
so I think,
and there's a predominant sort of cultural theme for a lot of people that still hearken to, like, their Depression era parents or grandparents of, like, oh yeah, well, no, that's all about risk minimization, conservative decision making, and I actually say, like, intelligent risk calculation and especially tolerance is the new adaptive survival trait. But there's a lot of people that are proud in their engineering or brain constructs that are like, no, that's for them, not for me. And I fear for them, honestly.
Yeah. Early on, when I was starting to write about AI, I actually used one of the image generators, and they used this metaphor of the dinosaur, admiring the approaching asteroid for its beauty. I mean, that's I'm sorry, but that's what we're talking about here, right? And at some point the asteroid strikes the Earth, right? And so you've got to be sort of thinking about it in those terms. I started writing about AI early in 2023 because my son, who runs an AI startup actually in Toronto, 2 weeks after ChatGPT was released, sent it to me and said, "Dad, you got to look at this," right? And I did. I really dug in on it, right? So I was probably the first person at IMD to start to grapple with the technology, right? And it just blew me away completely to see what this thing could do. But also, and I think this is maybe another point, Jeff, right, which is, I see lots of people and organizations trying to grapple with the technology as it is, and not anticipating where the technology is going to go, right?
So in other words, not think strategically.
Yeah, or it's kind of like a static, okay, this has happened, now I need to respond to that, right? But no, it's where it's going that you need to keep your eyes on, and in order to stay ahead of the curve, in order to anticipate what's going to happen, you need to be thinking forward about this, right? And so I think, again, it comes back to some of those qualities that you talked about. And I, in some of the earliest writing, I used two metaphors. One was the asteroid and the dinosaur, and the other was riding the tsunami, right? Surfing the tsunami. And that's what I think you have to be able and willing to do to thrive going forward.
So in the interest, the ever-present interest of serving my guest, I'm going to suggest that this has been a improvised infomercial for your book, and that we've structured it as sort of like, problem, solution, problem, present thinking of solution, insufficiency of present thinking of solution, need for more strategic thinking of solution, relevance to the average person to be more strategic in their thinking about the solution, about the problem, which is a great time to point them to the 6 disciplines of strategic thinking that we now have a lens for, of saying, this isn't how to be an executive at a large company that just came in. And no, this is for every human that's going to have to deal with being alive for the next couple decades, or might even, to go, how am I going to navigate? How am I going to ride the tsunami, right? And the 6 disciplines, I have them here: pattern recognition, systems analysis, mental agility, structured problem solving, visioning, and political savvy, i.e. human soft skills. Sounds like an incredible framework for everyone thinking about their life as AI approaches.
That was truly beautiful, Jeff. Thank you.
I do what I can.
I was really I appreciate it a lot. Yeah.
No, I mean,
enjoyed the conversation a lot.
Yeah, I have too. We are out of time. We never got to the love-based leadership question, which actually I'm going to.
Just what is love-based leadership?
Okay, so this is essentially our hypothesis about not just the effective kind of leadership, but frankly, in the context of this conversation, the type of leadership that is last and least likely to be usurped by programmatic leadership, whether human or robotic or otherwise. And it's essentially, this is a little bit of an oversimplification, but what my wife and I did was we took nonviolent communication, which is interpersonal relationships communication framework that the audience has heard me talk about plenty of times, and said, what would it look like to try to apply this nonviolent communication, which at its core is about level power dynamics. In other words, it's non-hierarchical, it's non-positional, to use John Maxwell's reference. It's not like everyone's equal no matter who's talking to who, and there's a language framework that supports that and creates connection rather than control. What would it look like to apply that at the level of organizational management and organizational theory?
Yes.
And which organizations are fundamentally hierarchical and stratified. But what if nobody communicated in that way inside an organization, and what could it create? Really? And what are the adaptations you'd have to do to the theory to make it scale in that way? That's kind of at our core.
No, I mean, it touches on really, really centrally critical stuff, right? Like, how do you focus more on creating joint gains and less on, on dividing things up, right? It focuses, I think, more on the whole, how do we construct purpose in the context of our organizations, right? There's a guy who you might be interested in getting on the program at some point, who Nicholas Gianni is his name, who wrote this wonderful book that got a big book award last year called The Leader is Healer. And I think,
I love it already.
Interesting. Yeah. If you want an introduction, I'm happy to connect it to him.
I would be grateful for that. I think the quote that I go back to as foundational for my life and ultimately predictive of this work and this attention focus that I've given it is when Ayn Rand said, the civilization is the process of setting man free from men. And this juxtaposition of the need, and she obviously comes from, Soviet Union, so she's got this anti-collectivist purview, but like the juxtaposition of the needs of the collective against the needs of the individual, and to approach that non-violently where neither one is subordinated to the other. And then what does that look like in practice in a business is so fast. It's like, I mean, I'll probably live my life around this, from here. But I don't know. I know we're out of.
Have you written the book yet?
No. You can feel it in the works. So we actually, my wife and I lead, as part of our platform, we lead live events, and it's become it's become curriculumized across a 3-part event series now. And so, the book is probably inherent at some point. I feel like we have more to talk about. Would I be presumptuous to see if you'd like to come back on the show at some point?
I would love to come back. This has been a super interesting conversation. I really enjoyed it. I'd be very happy to do so.
Okay. Audience, you heard it here. You can help me hold Watkins to it.
From Harvard. Let's not forget Harvard.
Yes.
Watkins. You got to drop Harvard.
Watkins from Harvard. Hey, no, seriously, Michael, this has been so much fun. And I'm excited to only have to say goodbye for now, because we will have you back. But any parting thoughts, and in particular, how can the world come get more of your goodness? Obviously, there's your book, and what else?
LinkedIn is always the best way, right? I run my own LinkedIn. I respond to my own messages. It's the best channel to get me on. Just Michael Watkins is,
Okay.
You should find me if you do that on LinkedIn.
The 6 disciplines of strategic thinking. We'll put all the links in the show notes. And thank you again, man. It's been wonderful.
Hey, no, it's a super pleasure, Jeff. Thanks so much for the conversation.
Of course. And to all you viewers and listeners out there, you are the best part of the show, why we do it every time. And I can't wait to see you next time. Take care.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
Sometimes setting an objective is actually bad for you, especially if you're interested in innovation and creativity and exploration. If you're not willing to take risks, then don't do this and stay in the objective straitjacket because it's safer. But if you want to do something great, this is the only way.